It rains here more than 2/3 of the year. The streets are quiet, the hedges are tall, and on one ordinary-looking road on the western edge of Vancouver, a house just like the others changed hands for $31 million. The buyer? On the official land title, his occupation was listed as one single word: student. This is a street where a tear-down lot can cost more than a mansion in almost any other city in the world, where the most expensive homes in Canada hide behind plain gates and dripping cedar trees, where the money is so quiet and so enormous that the rest of the country is still arguing about where it even came from. This is Asian Dynasty, and these are the Asian billionaire mansions of Vancouver, homes and owners that are genuinely next level, because once you see who really lives behind these gates and how they got here, you will never look at this rainy little city the same way again. Let's get into it. Before we get to the people, you have to understand the street, because in Vancouver, the address is the Flex. The neighborhood is called Point Grey, on the city's far west side, perched on a bluff above a beach called Spanish Banks. The road that runs along the top of that bluff is Belmont Avenue. And Belmont is not just an expensive street, it might be the single most expensive stretch of residential land in the entire country. Look at the lists of the most valuable homes in British Columbia, and the same address keeps appearing. Belmont Avenue shows up 5 separate times in the province's top 10 most expensive properties. It appears 14 times in the top 50. One street, 14 of the 50 priciest homes in the province. The locals stopped calling it Belmont a long time ago. They just call it Billionaires Row. From the road, you would barely notice it. There are no gold gates, no fountains, no marble lions. That is the entire point. The wealth up here does not announce itself. It just sits behind the hedge, facing the water, quietly worth a fortune that most people will never come close to seeing in a lifetime. And in 2016, one house on this street became famous all over the world. Not for how it looked, for who bought it. The house was 4833 Belmont Avenue, 5 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, 14,600 square feet, sitting on roughly 1.75 acres of that priceless bluff. The seller was a well-known name in Canadian finance, Peter Brown, the founder of the investment firm Primacorp, and in the spring of 2016, he sold it for a record price of $31.1 million. But it was not the price that set the internet on fire. It was the paperwork. When reporters pulled the land title, they found the buyer holding 99% of this $31 million mansion was a man named Tianyu Zhou, and next to his name in the field for occupation was a single word: student. The other 1% was held by a woman listed as a businesswoman. The records showed a mortgage of nearly $10 million from a Canadian bank, with payments rolling out every 2 weeks. A student buying one of the most expensive homes in the country. The story exploded across Canada and across China. It became the perfect symbol of something Vancouver had been quietly living with for years. Vast amounts of overseas wealth flowing into a handful of streets parked in real estate, often in the names of family members who, on paper, did not appear to earn very much at all. And here is the part that tells you how deep this goes. That study everyone pointed to afterward, it found that in one stretch of Vancouver's west side, students made up around 5% of all the buyers of single-family homes. The average value of the homes those students bought was over $3 million each. This was not one strange house, it was a pattern. So that is the new money, fast, foreign, and impossible to ignore. But just a few doors down Billionaires Row sits a very different kind of story. And this one ends with the most expensive single-family home sale this city has ever recorded. The house is called the Belmont Estate, 22,000 square feet, 5 bedrooms, 12 bathrooms, an indoor pool, a sauna, a 6-car garage, all of it sitting on 1.3 acres with a view of the beach, the mountains, the harbor, and the entire downtown skyline. For decades, it belonged to a Vancouver retail legend named Joe Siegel and his wife, Rosalie. To be clear, the Siegels are not part of our story. They are the sellers. The story is who walked in and bought it. The estate first hit the market with an asking price of $63 million, the most expensive home ever listed in the city. Then it was trimmed to $58. And then, away from the public listings, in a quiet private deal, it sold for $42 million, the highest price ever paid in Metro Vancouver for a single-family home on a single lot. The buyer did not put his own name on the door. He bought it through a numbered company. But when you trace who controls that company, you find one man. And his story is the opposite of a faceless foreign student. His name is Peter Chung, and he did not start anywhere near Billionaires Row. Chung was born in Korea. When he was 14, his family immigrated, not to Canada but to Los Angeles. His father was a pastor at a small Korean church, and the family struggled to build a new life in a new country with very little. That is where this $42 million mansion story actually begins. not with inherited money. With a pastor's son in a tough corner of LA, what Chung had was a relentless engine for two things: education and work. He studied at UCLA, then Stanford, then Harvard Business School, and in 1995, he founded a company in Vancouver called Primacorp Ventures. He bet on a simple idea, that the thing that had lifted his own family, education, was something he could build a business around. He was right beyond anything he could have imagined. Today, Primacorp is the largest private provider of post-secondary education in all of Canada, and it did not stop at classrooms. The company expanded into real estate, into senior living, into a whole conglomerate employing around 1,700 people. The pastor's son, who arrived in America with almost nothing, now sits at the top of an empire and inside the most expensive house ever sold in Vancouver. That is the thing about these mansions. Some of them are a parking spot for money made an ocean away, but some of them are the finish line of an immigrant story that took 30 years and 3 continents to run. We are about halfway up this hill now. So let me ask you something, and drop your answer in the comments. Of all the names so far, the student, the pastor's son, had you heard a single one of them before today? Because the most powerful people in this city are almost never the ones you have heard of. And the next family proves it perfectly, because not all of Vancouver's Asian wealth is new. Some of it has been quietly running this city for over 30 years. Meet the Chan family. The story starts not in Canada, but in Hong Kong, with a man named Dr. Chan Shun. In 1952, he opened a small shirt factory, just dress shirts sold locally. But Chan Shun had a gift for building, and that little factory grew into a company called Crocodile Garments. By 1970, Crocodile was the single largest garment retailer in all of Hong Kong. A crocodile logo on shirts across the territory, and a serious fortune behind it. Then, in 1989, the family did something that changed Vancouver. They moved. Chan Shun arrived in British Columbia with his sons Caleb and Tom, and they brought Hong Kong business instincts to a quiet Canadian market that had no idea what was about to hit it. The brothers looked around and made a very specific bet. Not on shirts, on land, and on leisure. Their very first purchase in 1989 was a property in the BC interior that came with a golf course. That one deal became the seed of an empire. Through their company, Burrard International, and its golf arm, Golf BC, the Chans went on to control 6 golf courses across British Columbia and another 3 in Hawaii. Prime, beautiful, enormous tracts of land in 2 of the most desirable places on the Pacific. By 2017, the respected Canadian business magazine estimated the Chan family's combined wealth at around $1.07 billion. Genuine, verified billionaires. And here is the tell, the thing that connects them to that quiet street up on the bluff. You have probably never heard their names. They do not chase magazine covers. They live behind the same kind of tall hedges and quiet gates as everyone else up here. What they did do with the money is build. The Chan family gave more than $10 million to the University of British Columbia to create the Chan Center for the Performing Arts, one of the most beautiful concert halls in the country, with its main hall named the Chan Shun Concert Hall, after the man who started it all with a single shirt factory. From a crocodile logo in 1950s Hong Kong to a billion-dollar fortune and a concert hall on the Canadian coast. That is what old money looks like in this city. Silent, patient, and absolutely everywhere once you know where to look. Now, by this point, you might be picturing all of this as one giant story of money pouring in and old houses being knocked down. And for years, that was the loudest version of the Vancouver story. Foreign cash, demolished character homes, dark, empty mansions. But there is a quieter story up in these neighborhoods that almost nobody tells. And it might be the most surprising one of all. Move inland from the water into a leafy old neighborhood called Shaughnessy, the original home of Vancouver's elite, full of century-old mansions. There stands a grand arts and crafts manor known as the Rosemary, built around 1915 by a liquor tycoon and named after his daughter. By the 2010s, it was a fading, run-down giant, exactly the kind of heritage home people feared would be bulldozed for something new and glassy. It was bought by an immigrant from China named Mingfei Zhao for just over $11 million, and everyone assumed they knew what came next. Tear it down, build a mega mansion. He did the exact opposite. Zhao had fallen in love with the British TV series Downton Abbey with its grand old English houses, and he decided to restore the Rosemary, board by board, back to its original early 1900s glory. He said, openly, that he wanted to shatter one of the city's ugliest stereotypes, the idea that buyers from China only ever destroy the old to throw up the new. He spent years and a small fortune bringing a 14,000 square foot heritage home back to life. When it later returned to the market, it was listed for nearly $20 million. A monument, not a teardown. And that is the contradiction at the very heart of these Vancouver mansions. The same wave of money that frightened the city also poured fortunes into saving some of its most beautiful buildings. The truth, like the wealth itself, was never as simple as the headlines. So let's step back and look at what all of this really built. Vancouver's wealth got so concentrated so fast that the government itself had to step in. In 2016, British Columbia introduced a foreign buyer tax, an extra 15% slapped onto every home purchased by a foreign national, later pushed all the way up to 20%. The effect was instant. The share of foreign buyers in the market collapsed from over 13% to under 2% in just 3 months. Sales fell off a cliff that autumn. Then came the empty homes tax, because so many of these gorgeous mansions sat dark and unoccupied, owned but unused, that the city began charging up to 3% of a home's entire value every single year just for leaving it empty. Think about what that tells you. There was so much money parked in these houses that some owners would rather pay a yearly penalty in the hundreds of thousands than actually live in them or rent them out. That is the real meaning of next level. It is not just the size of the homes or the views or the indoor pools. It is that an entire global river of wealth chose this one rainy city on the far western edge of Canada and quietly poured itself into a few square miles of hillside until the whole place was rewritten. And here is the pattern underneath all of it. A student on a land title, a pastor's son from a struggling church in Los Angeles, a shirt factory family from Hong Kong, a man restoring a century-old manor to prove a point. Completely different lives, completely different fortunes, all of them pulled to the same handful of streets, all of them choosing real estate as the place to make their wealth permanent and real, because that is what these mansions actually are, not just trophies. They are anchors. For people who built or moved fortunes across oceans, a house on the bluff is the one thing that says, finally, we are here and we are not leaving. The money came from everywhere: Hong Kong, Korea, mainland China, old empires, and brand new ones. But it all came to rest in the same place, behind the tall hedges, above the rainy beach, in the quietest, most expensive neighborhood in the country. The richest people in Vancouver were never going to be the loudest. They were just the ones who understood, earlier than everyone else, that the real flex was never the car in the driveway. It was owning the ground the whole city is standing on. If this one surprised you, go watch our deep dive on the single richest family in this same city, the dynasty that helped build the skyline itself. And tell me in the comments, of all these mansions, which owner's story stayed with you the most? I think you already know mine.